What's on your mind?
Pretty much regulations. I guess I'm a YouTube fan of yours, and I work in air conditioning, refrigeration.
Yeah.
And regulations are kind of ridiculous with my industry as far as permitting and especially licensing. Licensing, the requirements are unbelievable nowadays.
In Florida.
And pretty much any state. I'm pretty sure regulations are nationwide.
Who creates those? Are those federal regulations or are they state regulations?
Actually, the feds are getting into it now with energy efficiency regulations that the states are
adopting. So the feds have energy requirements, right? I know that, like, they have it for home heating units, and they're saying it for. I would imagine there are probably some for HVAC, but the vast majority of the regulations you're dealing with are propagated by the Florida. State legislature. But okay, go ahead.
So compliance is pretty much up to the customer. I usually give like a couple of quotes, one with permitting, one without permitting. And the permitting seems like it's just a unnecessary hassle that doesn't really protect the consumer from anything.
The permitting, I would imagine, when you talk about permits, that's going to be even more local, right? You're not filing with a state agency to get the permit to build that. I think you're probably, I mean, if it's like New York, if you're doing some type of construction work, you are filing with maybe the county, but probably the town or the city.
Yes.
Okay.
But all the regulations are based on national standards. There's an organization called ASHRAE that produces standards every 4 years for energy efficiency, for all kinds of stuff. That like contractors, I mean, they use them as references once in a while, but they're not complied with, and obviously, like, inspectors are not going to check every single thing, so it's pretty much impossible for the government to get involved in any of this stuff. It's pretty much the only reason that licensing and permitting exists, in my opinion, is just to steal money from the contractors and obviously from the customer, because you have to increase the prices of what you're installing. So, and same thing goes for, I'd imagine, any industry. I know about air conditioning and engineering. I also worked in the engineering field, and all that is just pretty much recommendations, and the engineers use them. Sometimes we use rules of thumb, and mostly to produce. Because if we're going to follow every single regulation, we're not going to be profitable. So it's just an unnecessary hassle. And
so you don't think there should be any regulations in the context of, let's say, building buildings? Do you think that, like, there should be requirements as to how much? I don't know, like maybe what the quality of the cement is. You're in Florida, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Do you have any recollection of anything that might have happened in Florida over the past year that implicates, let's say, things like safety for building codes?
Yeah, I watched your debate with Yaron Brook.
Mm-hmm.
I started talking about building that fell.
Yeah.
That's what you're talking about, I guess.
Yeah.
I've read up on that, and it looks like it's 8 years ago there was a private engineer that they hired to give them a report on the structure of the building, and they have their little community inside the building that they debate stuff and what gets funding and what doesn't, and as far as repairs.
Right.
And,
right, but you answered your own question. It's a private.
Well, okay, but what do you take? What do you take from that?
That the government inspector failed.
Wait, who's the government inspector?
There was a certificate of occupancy issued by the state for that building.
And so, so maybe they failed by what? Not coming enough and ordering the building to do it. Like the argument you're making is there should be stricter government regulation regarding that structure.
They don't work.
They shouldn't be allowed to debate it. They shouldn't be allowed to debate it. As soon as that, there probably should have been a regulation that said, hey, if this engineer has this finding, they've got to file it immediately with this regulatory body. And if we don't get that regulatory body does not get a compliance with that recommendation, we're gonna say the building is condemned.
It's impossible. There's no way to get the specialists you need under government. Everybody that knows what they're doing in building construction and installation of equipment.
Dude, you just said the private engineer went through there and gave it to, where was the government involved in that process?
It doesn't. Even if the government had the report, they wouldn't have been able to interpret it. There's no, the residents are just like the government. It would have been pretty much like the committee that they had there interpreting it, but they would call it like the state. The state is interpreting it instead of the committee for the condominium there.
Well, that committee for the condominium, they're private. They're not the state.
Yes, but that's what you would see in a government.
No, they just debated because they were like, we can hold off. We don't want to spend the money.
Yeah, they took the risk and they suffered the consequences. I guess it's unfortunate, but that's what happens when you take risks.
Oh,
I see. When you take risks?
I see. And so everybody in that building took that risk.
Well, yeah, they had 8 years to fix it.
Everybody in that building. Kids.
Well, they put the parents of those kids. The parents were the owners. Mm-hmm. Right. So.
Yeah. So no. So let's walk through this. Parents were. The kids had the mistake of making parents who made the mistake of trusting the board. Is that it?
They are the board.
Do you have kids?
Are the board.
Do you have kids?
Yes.
Okay. What do you know about cars?
A lot, actually.
Okay. What do you know about medicine?
I'm not an expert, so I just leave it up to the experts.
You leave it up to the experts. Is that right?
In the private industry.
In the private industry. So what if you have no mechanism in the private industry in medicine? You know that everybody there is licensed, right?
Yeah, just like me. We don't follow regulations.
Okay. You don't follow regulations. So you're talking about what you want is a world in which your kids go to unlicensed doctors who have studied at unlicensed institutions to teach them about medicine, who are advocating all sorts of, I'm sure you're aware of the dynamic that took place with opioids in this country, who are prescribing drugs that have been tested only by the manufacturers of those drugs. They are under no requirement to show it to any agency. I'm sure you're also aware of what happened with the financial crisis when we had private bond ratings who supposedly were independent only because there was government regulation that said they supposedly had to be. And so you're willing to subject your kids to getting treated by a doctor for whom there are no standards whatsoever, who are prescribing drugs in which there are no standards as what they do it, who have gotten their education from institutions with no standards, or ones that they could simply purchase, right? Because
there are standards. There are standards in my industry as well.
Well, who imposes the standards for doctors?
Who opposes them?
Who imposes those standards for doctors?
Themselves. They're the experts. So there's no way for...
How do you know they're the experts?
Because that's who the government references. Because they use the reference. I actually was on the board.
Wait. Eliminate the government. I want you to tell me how you know they're experts, and don't say the word government.
their services. If I can install an air conditioner and they can see that it's installed and working, then they know that I know what I'm doing.
Who, the customer?
Yeah.
Okay. How many patients of your doctor, of your kid's pediatrician have you consulted?
How many what?
How many patients of your doctor, of your kid's pediatrician have you consulted?
What's great about the free tech industry is that there's ratings on Google, which is excellent, actually, I think. I hope that the ratings don't get regulated by the government, because those are very useful to everybody.
You don't think that those ratings are in any way regulated? Like there's no
or gamed?
Or gamed?
Well,
so you're willing to rely on Yelp with your kids going to a doctor? Is that right?
I'm willing to rely on the establishment. If I walk into there, if there are a bunch of nurses, I mean, it's obvious. If you go into an establishment that's 30 years old, you can tell that the guy, and then when you talk to the guy, he's going to inform you of stuff that you're not aware of. Like I do with my customers.
I see.
This is foolproof.
So in other words, you don't know any other patients of your pediatrician, even though you just said the way to find out if I put in good air conditioners is go and ask my other customers.
Yeah, that's pretty much how everybody does it, pretty much.
Right.
I mean, it's not.
Right.
We don't.
Well, everybody right now relies on government licensing for their doctors. That's how they feel confident when they walk in there that this is not just some dude who decided to be a doctor, bought a doctor's outfit, and is now going around being a doctor.
Pretty sure there was one of those guys in Florida.
Well, they have happened. Certainly, they're the exception to the rule. But do you really think that you could walk in? Let me ask you this. Do you really think that you could walk into my office and I'm wearing a doctor's outfit and there's no regulations on this stuff, right? And that I couldn't convince you that I know what I'm talking about when it comes to doctoring?
I'm looking at an article, Florida teen arrests after posing as doctor, opening medical practice.
Oh no, that guy's going to be. he's going to. Why would you go to a teenager to get like surgery? But he
convinced some people he was a doctor, and you know how they found out he wasn't a doctor?
How?
He was unlicensed.
Oh wow. So unlicensed means incompetent. Like everybody in the roofing industry, and I know them, is unlicensed. Everybody on the roof is an illegal alien. They don't even have documents. How do they know what they're doing?
Well, how do they know what they're doing with roofing? I mean,
they don't even have a social security number. How do you know? Because in order to get a license, you need a social security number. That's the first step.
So wait a second. You're saying the reason why we should have doctors who are unlicensed is because there are some companies who hire roofers that are undocumented. Is that the reasoning? Or you're saying it works out okay for roofing. Why wouldn't it work out for internal medicine or things like, food safety?
You had a doctor call in to your show and explain to you what the regulations are and how much he follows them, you'd be shocked. And anyway, like the medical malpractice is one of the biggest costs.
That is absolutely 100% a fabrication.
Medical malpractice?
Medical malpractice is not remotely close to one of the largest costs. It also has nothing to do with your argument, incidentally.
Yes, it does. Licensed doctors can be incompetent.
Well, I'm not saying that licensed doctors can't be incompetent. Of course they can. But a whole industry of unlicensed doctors will surely bring you more incompetence.
But the licensing doesn't make them better. So
the licensing doesn't make them better. It's absurd. Of course it does. It says that you must have you have to have attended a medical school for one. You have had to pass some tests that in any way like measure your least amount of competence.
Most doctors just give you aspirin and
Oh, so I understand it now. Doctors are not important, so we don't need them to be competent. Is that the argument?
licensing doesn't make you competent.
I didn't say that licensing it makes you competent.
It tests if you
licensing weeds out people who have gotten no medical training.
No,
Are you sick? Are you out of your effing mind? Dude, you can say that there are incompetent doctors who get medical training and still are bad, but licensing of doctors weeds out people who have not had medical training. If you do not think that medical training is important to being a doctor, which it sounds like you're sort of on the fence about because all they do is dispense aspirin, well, then maybe in that world it'll work. But this is absurd. This is absurd. Where do you go to get your medical treatment? Have you had? Do you had any major dental work done?
Well, if we want to talk about it in general, the doctors that I've been to in my life, I'd say maybe.
Have you had any expensive medical procedures done in your life or anybody in your family?
Yes, arthroscopic knee surgery.
Okay. Where did you have that done? What country?
United States.
How much was it?
Unfortunately, at the time, it was $40,000 that
Okay. Let me ask you a question, dude. Listen, let me ask you a question. I know, I'm sure it was all regulation that added that expense. And if that's the case, why did you have it done in the United States?
I could have had it in Brazil. There are a lot of competent doctors in there.
Why didn't you do it?
Didn't cross my mind. I mean,
it didn't cross your mind? Wait a second. You're sitting here telling me that I need to have a total awareness about the pediatrician I sent my child to, and it didn't even cross your mind when you got to pay $40,000 that you could have gone to any number one of countries around the world. I don't even know why you got to go to Brazil. I mean, you can find it cheaper than that. You can find it cheaper than that. I'm sure like you could have found a dude in like Somalia. Like, I mean, people must like you could have come to countries that like you could have gotten cheaper done somewhere else. Why wouldn't you do that?
I could have. You're right. Yeah.
Why didn't you do that?
It didn't slip my mind. I mean,
it didn't. Wait a second. So there's two different arguments here. One is that you're saying that we need to have total awareness about when we go to doctors because we're not going to have licensing. And then on the hand, you're just like, you dropped $40,000 and didn't even contemplate the idea that I could go to a country that is far cheaper. It'll cost me, max a couple of grand to fly to. Now you can get the thing done, $1,800. Why didn't you just have your neighbor do it? You didn't have to tell anybody. Yeah, I'm sure there was a YouTube that they could have done and just gotten to figure out a way of doing it that way.
But if my neighbor is a competent surgeon, then why not? I mean, you can tell when somebody doesn't know what they're talking about in any.
Hey, dude, don't tell me I can tell what I know what a doctor can do. You just blew $40,000 because you insisted on getting a doctor that was just local. It didn't even occur to you.
I don't know what you're saying. Like, you can walk into a doctor's office and know if he's incompetent or not.
No,
I can it's just a sense.
Super easy.
Like
are there any people in your business?
Sense.
Are there any people in your business who are incompetent?
Oh yeah.
How do they get business?
A lot of business.
How do they stay in business?
They don't.
They don't. So wait a second. You're telling me there's no HVAC businesses that you're aware of that are bad at what they do that stay in business for how long? How many customers do you think that they have before they go out of business?
Very few. The mechanics that I've trained, the ones that I know couldn't do well failed pretty quickly. They're working.
So you have no competitors who are any less competent than you are. They're all out of business.
Most of them are pretty good. Most of them are pretty good.
What do you mean most of them? What do you mean most of them? I'm asking you about all of them. You're in this business. You're asking me to judge my pediatrician's abilities without any sort of basis on that. Surely in your business, you must be aware of every single one of your competitors. How could you not be? And you're telling me that they're all excellent because otherwise they'd be out of business.
Yeah, the ones that are in business are all excellent. Same as your industry. I mean, who makes it in your industry? Only the people that know how to debate, which I commend you. You're a really good debater. No. And
no, that's not absolutely 100% not the case. There's a lot of idiots in my business.
Also, we're unregulated,
who are bad.
So.
And I'm not licensed.
But I think you're pretty good. So your competitors lose to you.
All right. Well, fair enough.
And you do.
That is the first thing that you've said that I think has any rationality to it whatsoever.
It also, yeah, and that's why you lost this one, dude.
I do appreciate the call, and I hope, for the sake of your health and your children's health, you never, ever, ever have to live in the world that you hope will come about.
Okay, nice talking to you.
All right, you too. Appreciate it, man.
Hey, well, he kept his cool.
It's already uphill battle to be arguing against building codes and regulations in 2021 coming from Florida, but to argue against medical licensing entirely, I think.
We could have competing agencies that issue a medical license. I mean, just contemplate how this would work, right? Because that's the other answer that he didn't have, which is, well, we could have private licensing firms instead of the government. Oh, right. And here's my innovation in that world. I'm going to give you a good grade if you pay me money.
Well, so isn't that what the ratings agencies?
That was the problem with the ratings agencies. That was something else.
Yay!
All right, let's take one more phone call. Calling from a 206 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hello, my name is Ivan, calling out of Federal Way, Washington.
Hello, Ivan. What's on your mind?
Two things. One would be the regulation things. Like, I work in the food industry, and we're required to get something called the food handler's card, which essentially is like the washing your hands procedures, where to store fish properly, things like that.
Waste of time.
Required by law.
Waste of time. Waste of time. Waste of time.
I would check out the Lauren Boebert pork slider story to see how much of a waste of time this is.
Speaking as someone who just had food poisoning, I am never going to eat whatever that was again, and I'm fine. I'm fine.
But yeah, even like talking about like Typhoon Mary, like holy shit, like crazy stuff, like washing your hands is like the most important thing, and this guy just wants to cut off all regulations on that. So I don't want to live in that kind of world.
It wouldn't take long. I mean, when I used to get libertarians call in on my radio show, the first question I would ask them is, do you have diarrhea? And if the answer was no, it would be because of the regulations that make sure that your drinking water is clean, and that your food is been properly handled. Because in the world that he's talking about, 60% of us at all times would have runaway diarrhea. But go ahead.
Can you imagine?
I can, actually. In the past couple of weeks, I've had a problem. But yes, continue.
Hello, Tushy.
Yes, there you go. Folks, there's more of what you've just saw where that came from. That's if you hit the subscribe and like button. Thank you. Really, thank you.